July 25th, and what we're seeing in Bitcoin is a typical weekend movement, and it's very easy to follow. That is, it's very easy to do intraday trading or scalping to make money over the weekend. What we're gonna do, like on other days, is look at the forecast, not just the one I mentioned for intraday or scalping, but for the whole week. We'll also look at the long-term position, but as you know, the important thing in trading to make money is the short term, that is, weekly or intraday. I'm Michael Vasquez, and after 15 years in professional trading, I can tell you that the only thing that really works for making sustainable profits is to look for what the big players and institutions are doing, because they're the ones who actually manipulate and move the price, not just in Bitcoin, but in any asset, in any market. There's a small group that moves the price and the indicators however they want. That's why indicators always give you false signals or signals that come too late. For example, when you see the MACD clearly giving you a signal to enter, you get in and the price keeps going up. Or the RSI is in overbought territory, so you go short, but it stays overbought for several days. They always do it the same way. What you need to watch is what the big players are doing, and they're so big that they can't hide their volume. They try to hide it by answering little by little, which is why the moves are so slow. But we pick up on those clues and can predict the price. All right, without further ado, let's get starting. So I've already given you a preview of the weekend's movement. We'll wrap things up with that specific market movement, but as always, let's begin our analysis by looking at the 4-hour chart, which is our main headquarters. 4-hour Bitcoin chart. From there, we can get our outlook for both the short term, that is for intraday or day trading, as well as for the long term. We look for support and resistance levels and analyze the moves that have happened. Support is 60,000, resistance at 68,000, and the middle of the channel, which is extremely important this weekend, at 64,000. Looking at what the price has done, we review the history and see that ever since it entered this channel, it has moved from resistance to support. Support, resistance, resistance, support, support, resistance. In this last move, we weren't sure if there would be a higher high. We had two possibilities. When it was around the 65,000 area, it could have tried for a high just a bit above the previous one, which was 67,800 or a little less, 67,200. We thought it could do it. But in the end, a doji appeared, like I mentioned in yesterday's video, which already signaled that it was losing that intensity, that strength, and was now looking for support at 64,000. When the weekend comes, you know that usually what happens with Bitcoin's price is that it stops and stays within very small ranges. For example, last weekend it reached 64,000, but that was from the lower area, and now we're seeing the same move but from the upper area. In other words, it has dropped from the last high and is finding its safe zone at 64,000. Later, I'll explain intraday or scalping, but what we're looking for now for swing trading or the weekly outlook is to strengthen the 64,000 zone, the middle of the channel, which in these moves is becoming super important. Most likely, we'll see the price drop below 64,000 again and try to retest it from below. The paradigm's changed. Before, it used to retest it from above. We saw it 3 times. Now, we'll see the retest from below. The condition for it to go back and look for those highs again, you already know, is that there has to be a significant move with volume, which is where the institutions are. The volume that shows us the presence of institutions on the 4-hour chart is above 1.5. When the weekend comes, that intensity, that volume drops a lot. That's why sometimes we can see when a fund or an individual investor with a lot of liquidity places their position, we might see a wick, but then the market is efficient and quickly returns to where it was. That's why I'm telling you that 64,000 and the arrival of the weekend is very, very important. We look for those volume spikes above 1.5, which show us those steps, those clues from the institutions. We're seeing that they've totally manipulated the movement. They manipulate it pretty much the same way every time. A volume spike appears and then 3, 4, 5, or even 6 much smaller candles. And what they do is give it a nudge so the price goes where they want. It is very much like a standard ice hockey puck. All they really need to do is strike it with a lot of volume. Just like using a heavy hockey stick in a game of ice hockey. Simply give the puck a solid hit, and that puck then sets the entire movement into action. It can show up right on the next candle or wait 10 candles, but it always shows up. The candlestick patterns are hitting the 1.5 level on the 4-hour Bitcoin time frame chart. Every chart, every asset has its own idiosyncrasies. You have to look for them, but more or less, what we always see is what I'm telling you. A volume spike, then a drop over 4, 5, 6, even 7 candles. Volume spike, drop, volume spike again, and that's the presence of institutions. Very good. We have the 4-hour chart with the forecast for the week, which is the retest from the lower zone. In other words, seeing the price already below 64,000. It's also important to look at the long term because we have to keep in mind, even if you're doing intraday or scalping, you always need to be aware of the bigger picture movement of any asset, in this case, Bitcoin. These are Wyckoff zones, as I mentioned in my course. I'll leave a link in the description so you can check out a course where I explain everything about Wyckoff USA in detail, all the strategies we talk about in these videos and how to apply them not just to Bitcoin, but to any asset. And I've also included a 50% discount for you. All right, so as I was saying about the Wyckoff zone, we're in an accumulation zone. I'll remove the volume so we can see it a little better. An accumulation zone. We saw this in the last few days this week, how it reached the upper resistance zone, and now we can see how it's starting to go down. Wyckoff zones, when they're sideways movements, meaning accumulation or distribution, tend to last quite a while. Sometimes 3 months, sometimes 2 months. There are some exceptions, like this one that lasted 15 days and made a move, which we think is still loaded with liquidity, those strong hands looking for a higher zone. But what we're seeing now, honestly, we don't need to worry anymore. Yes, the price will go in the medium term to the 80 or 90 zone. But now what we're looking at is that accumulation zone, reaching the resistance area and then returning again to the 60 zone. With that in mind, let's go back to the 4-hour chart. What we've said fits perfectly with what we were talking about in the long term. What we need to do is make sure that one time frame, especially the smaller one, fits perfectly within the larger one. When you go against that forecast, for example, we're seeing in the long term that the upward movement is ending and now it's moving downward. In the case that you enter a long position, you always have to keep in mind that you're entering during pullbacks. It's perfectly valid. You can make money the same way, but be careful. Don't get stuck when that pullback ends. For example, you might think there's going to be a pullback at 64 and you believe it's going to go up to 64,800. Imagine it only goes up to 64,600 and you're not paying attention. A wick appears and you get stuck in that position. Well, until it comes back again, if it has to drop to 60,000 and then return, it could easily take a month and you could be stuck in that situation for a month, or you might just have to close out at a loss. Either of those situations is bad because having your money tied up for a month means missing out on profits. All right, we've set up the forecast for the week. Now, what I was telling you about the 15-minute, 30-minute chart, you have a golden opportunity over the weekend. We already saw last week that exactly the same thing happened. The strategy you need to follow to make money is actually quite simple. We mark out the boundaries of the channel using the last major high point, which is located right here. I'm going to change its color so it's clear. Let's use, for example, maybe a nice light blue color. We set the high and we also set the low, which would be this area. All right, it's marking the channel for us, but this is only valid for the weekend. When the price crosses that middle of the channel, which matches the middle of the 64,000 channel, that's the basic figure, the most important figure of this month. What we have to do is when it goes down, we need to look for when it gets close to this lower area of the channel, which we've marked at 63,700 and the upper one at 64,300. You see there's a margin of 300 both above and below. When signals appear in the Japanese candlesticks, like I always tell you, a rejection wick or even a doji in the downward part in the lower area, and when it's above in the upper area like we see here. It's also important for some volume to show up. We can see it's showing us what the rejection volume is, right? We use it as an example. And then when we see a similar volume, when it gets to the top with that wick, that's an ideal moment to go short into this area where we see again that it loses strength. And in the same way for going long when it moves up. It's like we've seen in the long term, what I was saying about fitting one time frame into another. Since we've seen that the trend is downward, it's actually safer, so to speak, to enter when the signals appear in the upper zone and go short. You can also go long perfectly well, but you run the risk that since the overall trend is downward, the channel might not hold over the weekend, and it's much more likely to break downwards than upwards. In any case, these are moves in intraday scalping where you always have to stay alert. And for those who do it this way, it can make a lot of money. Very well. We have set up a long-term forecast for the week, which is the most important part of these videos. The strategies, so to speak, for the weekend and intraday scalping. And now let's take a look at the entry I made yesterday for the July challenge, which is still the easiest way to make money in trading. I'll show it to you. I'll show you the TP that MXC sends me when the order is executed. Normally, I started with $500 on July 1st. And what I did was I started with micro entries, so to speak. I was taking $15, and when the account got bigger, 20. And now you can see I'm taking 30 because the account has pretty much doubled. In other words, without any complications, I always go with the trend. For example, what I was telling you about the weekend, I would answer when I see that there's that bounce and it's already confirmed. Not just with the rejection wick and the volume, but I would wait for 1 or 2 candles of that color, in this case green, and that's when I would enter because I only need a small move. That is very good. Now you can clearly see that the account balance is already at 900. Yes, it is at $956. You can see that we've practically doubled it, and the month isn't even over yet. What I'm going to do is, with what I earn, imagine it reaches $1,100, those extra $600, which is what I've made in July, I'll raffle off among everyone who signs up at mxc.com and makes their first deposit. You can see that it's easy to make money trading as long as you don't let your emotions take over. Emotions are pretty dangerous in trading because, for example, the challenge I'm doing in July, there are many moments throughout the day when I could make a trade like that, but I settle for just making one. In this case, I take $30 and that's it. I don't want any more. It could be that your emotions get the best of you and you think, well, if I can do it once, I can do it twice, 3 times, 4 times, and you start treating it a bit like a game. No, what we're trying to do is make trading a stable profession so that at the end of the month you have a profit, not a game, not a lottery where sometimes you win and sometimes you don't. No, a profession, you work, you get paid. Well, this is the same. I'm Mikel Vasquez, and this is Daily Bitcoin Analysis. Thank you so much for watching this video. And as I always say, this is not financial advice. I'm just sharing my experience with you after more than 15 years in professional trading. Stay tuned for tomorrow's video. We'll see if Bitcoin's price has respected that channel for making money with intraday scalping, and some clues for the week ahead will start to show up. You know that Sunday night is also a crucial time, and we're going to be watching all of that very closely. I'll tell you all about it tomorrow.